I think it's Trump's proposed border wall a moral abomination. I think it's like the Berlin Wall. I think it's like any other wall designed to separate human beings and block out people who are running away from the humanitarian disasters. I just think it's wrong. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, February 20. Could the ironies be any richer? Could AOC's powers of reasoning be showcased any more starkly? To wit, the Berlin Wall, which even die-hard leftists like AOC seem to recognize as a moral abomination, was designed to keep desperate suffering people from escaping en masse from what Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders prescribe to make people happy. Trump's proposed border wall is designed to keep people who would elect people like Ocasio-Cortez and Sanders to afflict us with their socio-economic prescriptions from becoming future U.S. voters. Given the above, can you imagine a worthier project than the border wall? And speaking of people literally dying to flee socialism, did many of my amigos realize that over 10 times as many people, and counting, have died attempting to flee communist Cuba, which liberals routinely praise, than died trying to flee communist East Germany, which even liberals recognize as a horrible place, despite its free healthcare and education? Think about it. Have you ever heard a liberal hailing East Germany's free healthcare, and yet it was much better than Cuba's free healthcare, which liberals love to hail? In fact, when liberals hailed the Castros and Che Guevara's communism as somehow different from typical Iron Curtain communism, they have a point. It's worse. Between 200 and 300 people died trying to breach the Berlin Wall. Between 25 and 40,000 people, men, women, and children, entire families at a time, have died trying to escape Castro and Che Guevara's Cuba, a nation that prior to Castroism was inundated with more immigrants, mostly from Europe, per capita than was the U.S., including the Ellis Island years. In 1992, former East German dictator Erich Honecker was tried, to no avail, for the deaths of 192 Germans killed while attempting to cross the Berlin Wall. Some human rights groups estimate that actually 300 people, out of an average East German population over the decades of 18 million, died trying to breach the Berlin Wall or otherwise escape East Germany. After the thousands of many machine gun blasts from their frontier guards, the Berlin Wall itself was officially titled the anti-fascist protection rampart, kept disturbing Castro and Che's coastal subjects. The Castro brothers hit upon the scheme of having the Soviet helicopters flown by their guards hover over the escaping freedom seekers, often consisting of entire families, but to hold off on shooting. Instead of machine gunning the families to death as years of tradition called for, they switched to dropping sandbags onto the rickety rafts and tiny boats to demolish and sink them. Then the tiger sharks and hammerheads could do the Castroites' deputy work. Screams, groans and gurgles, after all, don't carry nearly as far as machine gun blasts. The best revolutionary German man I've ever known was Erich Honecker, tweeted Fidel Castro on June 1, 2012, commemorating the 18th anniversary of the East German Stalinists' death. I maintain feelings of profound solidarity with Honecker. What a chump, Castro was probably thinking. Measly 192. In 1 week during 1962 we counted over 400 firing squad blasts from the execution yard below our cells, recalled former Cuban political prisoner and freedom fighter Roberto Martin Perez to this writer. This is the most savage kind of behavior I've ever heard of, said Robert Gelbard, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Latin America during the Clinton administration. This is even worse than what happened at the Berlin Wall. Gelbard had watched desperate Cubans trying to swim to our Guantanamo base when machine guns opened up and the water around them frothed in white, then red. The corpses were retrieved by gallant Cuban frontier guards, in a boat using the same type of gaffing hooks the lucky contestants in the Castro regime-sponsored Hemingway Fishing Festival were using in nearby waters to yank thrashing tuna and marlin aboard their Cuba-registered yachts. In September 2011, Spanish medical examiners found that an airline stowaway from Cuba named Adonis GB had his throat crushed. He probably died upon takeoff, meaning he probably died more quickly and painlessly than the tens of thousands of others who perished escaping Cuba's free and fabulous healthcare. It was a different story for the tens of thousands of dead Cuban rafters. Most of these desperate rafters probably died like captives of the Apaches, staked in the sun and dying slowly of sunburn and thirst. Others perished gasping and choking after their arms and legs finally gave out and they gulped that last lungful of seawater, much like the crew in The Perfect Storm. Still others were eaten alive, drawn and quartered by the serrated teeth of hammerheads and tiger sharks, much like Captain Quentin Jaws. Perhaps these last perished the most mercifully. As we've all seen on the Discovery Channel, sharks don't dally at a meal. In space no one can hear you scream, says the ad for the original Alien. Same for the middle of the Florida Straits, except, of course, for your raft mates. While clinging to the disintegrating raft, while watching the fins rushing in and water frothing in white, then red, they heard the screams all too clearly. All during the decades coinciding with Castro's rule, the Coast Guard has documented hundreds of such stories. Were the cause of these horrors more politically correct, we'd have no end of books, movies, documentaries, TV interviews, survival story specials, etc. We'd never hear the end of it. Alas, the agents of this Caribbean Holocaust consist of the left's premier pin-up boys.